Right, let's try and break down what just happened there. Sony's E3 press conference was pretty different this year. Now, the company tried to set expectations before the show. They explained that they would be primarily focusing on 4 games. That is Spider-Man, Death Stranding, Ghost of Tsushima, and The Last of Us Part 2. So they brought attendees into what seemed like a church venue. Sean Layden came up on stage and he gave a brief introduction, and from there they seemed to bowl just straight into The Last of Us Part 2. So that trailer started off with Ellie, one of the main heroes from the first game. She seems to be at a party in this kind of barn, which actually mirrored the church that everyone was sat in for this event. She's partying with what seems like other survivors, and then she's taken out onto the dance floor and shares a kiss with what seems like, you know, another one of sort of her friends. And then as soon as that happens, it just hard cuts straight into one of the most gruesome, one of the most violent gameplay sequences I think I've ever seen at an E3 show. Yeah. We kind of got a sense of this in previous teasers for The Last of Us Part 2, and it was just here in full effect. You see Ellie, she's in this really tense showdown with what seems like a group of thugs, this sort of gang of thieves. She's stabbing people, she's hiding underneath cars, they're throwing her over like store tills, she's shooting people, she's got an axe, she's like just hacking away at people. Like, at times, it was pretty hard to watch, and don't get me wrong, the original Last of Us was pretty violent too, but this is like on another level. For me, as I say, it kind of made me a little bit uncomfortable at times, and I think if it was any other developer, that would give me cause for concern, but you know, Naughty Dog is a top-tier studio, clearly having worked on both the original Last of Us and so many Uncharted games. So I think people are giving them the benefit of the doubt, but yeah, that was a pretty wild opening. Once that was wrapped up, we had to have an intermission, and that was because they were moving attendees into a different room that was more like a kind of traditional theater. So whilst that was all taking place, they kind of cut back to a desk where Sean Layden was there again, and they were they had to show a few other brief trailers, like we got something for Call of Duty, Black Ops 4, and yeah, it was just really out of left field. I don't think any of the attendees really knew what was going on. We didn't know if there was going to be 4 different rooms for lots of different trailers, but it turned out to be that once they went into this second portion, that was kind of it for the rest of the press conference. But still, just pretty odd. So from there, we went into Ghost of Tsushima, which is being worked on by Sucker Punch. That's the studio behind Infamous, most famously. And yeah, this is their kind of samurai, kind of Shogun Edo era game. Again, that was pretty violent too, but it was this beautiful, breathtaking landscape. The main character, like, just going on a horseback, going across all of these luscious fields, and then finally sort of finding this building and sort of launching an attack on what seemed like a, you know, some kind of rival force. And that ended too with a kind of face-off, a duel with another warrior. And yeah, for Sucker Punch, it's a very different game, and it's really great to see them tackling like a completely new franchise. And if anything, I think I came away from that being just as excited for that title as I have been already for The Last of Us Part 2, so that was a great showing. From there, we moved on to Death Stranding, which is Hideo Kojima, most well known for the Metal Gear Solid franchise. This is his next darling, which Sony has locked down as a PS4 exclusive. And again, we saw Norman Reedus as the main character trying to survive in just this really strange world. There seems to be these kind of invisible monsters, and what they touch or what they attack, it seems to kind of accelerate time somehow. We've seen in previous trailers characters suddenly becoming very old and almost disintegrating. Some of the dialogue here was talking about how the building he was in, if they attacked, would become a crater. So yeah, just very, very strange, but we got a bit more of a glimpse of what felt a little bit more like gameplay, I guess. You got to see Norman Reedus' character as a kind of a delivery man, had all of these boxes and bags, kind of, you know, he was almost like a pack mule, really, walking across all of these mountains and fields, presumably doing jobs for what I guess are other survivors. We also got to see some new characters. They announced that Laura Wagner and also Leah Seydoux are taking on roles within the game. Again, these are really big name actors joining Mads Mikkelsen, for instance, and a cameo for Guillermo del Toro, the director. He's also in this game. Yeah, the music was beautiful too, and again, it was just an absolute gorgeous game to look at. The character models, the environments, it was just really breathtaking, and just the art direction for that, you can tell this is something that Kojima's been thinking about and kind of mulling over for a really long time. And then we had Spider-Man, which is a game that's coming out this year, like it's really soon. September isn't that far away. And so we've seen gameplay already, but this was kind of another peek at what players can expect. This time Spider-Man was inside a prison, facing off against multiple villains. The main one was Electro, but we also got to see Rhino, Scorpio, and at the end, Mr. Negative. And again, that was just a huge spectacle, lots of fist fighting, web slinging around the prison, and then finally you got to see kind of Peter up on this tower. It seemed like all the villains had ganged up on him, the odds were really against him, and finally, you know, you don't see it in shot, but Peter kind of says, "Oh no, like you," or something like that, and I'd like to think that that was teasing the introduction of Miles Morales, which Spider-Man fans will of course recognize. And I think it was really important to show this game in particular because those other 3 tentpole trailers that we saw, they're for games which are quite far out, whereas because Spider-Man is really soon, yeah, that was something that players can obviously really look forward to and get their hands on this year. So those were the big 4, but Sony did have some time to cram in a few third-party announcements. We saw Control, for instance, which is the next game from Remedy. They'd worked on Alan Wake and Quantum Break in the past. We got to see a little bit of the Resident Evil 2 remake. We also got to see a PlayStation VR title being worked on by From Software, the developers behind Bloodborne and Dark Souls. So there was time for a few extra surprises. But yeah, really it was focused on just these 4 big games, which is in such contrast to the Xbox press conference, for instance, which rammed in something like, 50 games, and so many of them were exclusives or kind of world premieres. So to see Sony take this tack was really different, and it was cool to see Sony trying something different this year. Whether it worked or not, I think it did for some people, probably not for the attendees who seemed very confused, especially in that first church-like room. But, Sony has such a healthy lead right now over the Xbox One. I think it could afford to do this, to try new formats, and at least for me, and I think for many other people, it was cool just to see a different type of presentation. All that's left now is Nintendo, and then the show is going to open up properly. We'll be there checking out games and talking to developers. For everything that's happening here at E3, keep checking out Engadget.com and youtube.com/Engadget.